I'd like to call to order the June 19th, 2018 Board of Zoning Appeals. If you'd please stand and join us for the pledge. I
pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
I'll make a note before we get too far along. If you're here to speak in public comment, you need to fill out a yellow card, please.
In the back on the tray.
I'll start with the introduction of our board members to my left.
Hodge Patel.
Brenda Hampstead.
Kim Sisson.
Todd Chernick.
Kim Keller.
Don Burtz.
The Board of Zoning Appeals is a quasi-judicial board comprised of resident volunteers of the City of Milton. The board is charged with hearing requests for variances from the standards of the zoning ordinance and appeals of administrative determination. With regard to decisions on primary variances, which we'll be hearing tonight, the board's basis for decision is provided by these four considerations. A, relief if granted would not offend the spirit or intent of the ordinance. And B, there are such extraordinary and exceptional situations or conditions pertaining to the particular piece of property that the literal or strict application of the ordinance would create an unnecessary hardship due to size, shape, or topography, or other extraordinary and exceptional situations or conditions not caused by the variance applicant. And C, relief if granted would not cause a substantial detriment to the public good and surrounding properties. And D, that the public safety, health, and welfare are secured and that substantial justice is done. I make a motion to approve tonight's published agenda as published.
I second.
I have a motion and a second. Is there any discussion? All in favor, say aye. Aye. Opposed? Motion passed unanimous. I also make a motion to approve the May BZA meeting minutes as published by the City of Milton.
Second.
A motion and a second. Is there any discussion regarding our action notes from last meeting? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed?
I abstain.
Motion passed unanimous with one abstention, Kim Keller. She wasn't present for the May meeting, correct?
Correct.
Moving on to item number 5 on our agenda is consideration of primary variances. I'll start with V18-005, which is 3505 Bethany Bend.
Mr. Chair, the applicant has notified us that he'd like to request a deferral, 30 days, till the next board meeting.
To the next meeting.
Please.
Any other background regarding the...
No, he just asked for a deferral. He wanted another 30 days to look at the plan and see if he can. The DRB asked, gave him some suggestions on placement and size and whatnot, and he said he just needed a little bit more time to review that because he might actually be able to do it without a variance. So he's trying. Okay,
we're all for working together on that. I'll make a motion then in consideration of what we've heard for V18-005 to be deferred to our next scheduled BZA meeting.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. Is there any discussion on that recommendation for deferral? All those in favor say aye.
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 Opposed? That motion passed unanimous. Moving on to the next item on our agenda is V18-006. 13600 Providence Road. Would staff please present?
Okay, so this is a two-part request variance is to allow an accessory structure to be located in the front yard and to allow an accessory structure to encroach into the minimum front yard. I'm going to do my best to be Angela tonight. She's a hard replacement.
Tough shoes to fill.
But all right, so just bear with me, okay? All right, so the background on this, the site is an 8.35 acre lot located along Providence Road. It is zoned AG1 and is located in the rural Milton overlay. Cooper Sandy Creek and its corresponding buffers bisect the lower part of the lot. There is extensive floodplain on the lot as well. The property includes a 5-bedroom, single-family home, fenced riding ring, and barn, which are out of the floodplain. As of 2017, there were 2 additional accessory structures in the 60-foot front setback. Those are existing. In 2017, an addition was added to the larger structure. Staff has no evidence that a building permit was obtained for this addition. The smaller of the 2 accessory structures was destroyed when trees fell on it during a storm in the winter of 2017. On January 31st, 2018, staff received a complaint stating that a structure was being built without a permit. Code compliance visited the site on February 2nd, 2018, and confirmed that there was no permit for the work in progress. The owners, Robert Beal and Carol Cokerly, am I saying that right? Yes, sir. Okay, were issued a courtesy notice indicating that work on the structure should stop until a building permit could be issued. The Beals began the process of obtaining the building permit for the 572 square foot structure and were informed that variance would be required because of the location. On April 16, 2018, Code Compliance noticed that the work on the structure had resumed and it appeared complete except for the siding on the exterior of the building. Section 64-744B states that destruction by any means of more than 60% of the gross square footage of a structure shall require that the structure be reconstructed in conformity with the provisions of the ordinance. So any more than 60%, normally it has to comply with the new laws. Per the section 64-416 of the ordinance, once it was destroyed, the structure should have been located in either the rear or side yard and out of all the minimum yards. The Beals replaced the original non-conforming structure with a larger structure located in front, both in the front yard of the property and the minimum building front setback. The structure is 26 by 22 feet. It's approximately 15 feet from the right-of-way. Per 64-416B, the minimum front building setback is 60 feet. Per definition, the front yard is the land area extending between the structure and any street. Because of the placement of this accessory structure, a 2-part variance is required. The DRB comments are as follows. I don't know how we approve this when we tell everyone else no. We will need to prove, you will need to prove a hardship, meaning the applicant will need to prove their hardship, provide a good description of why it shouldn't be placed somewhere else on the lot, and get letters from their neighbors. The architect, that's me, says that the structure has really no architectural significance. The arborist says there appear to be other areas on the property where the shed could be placed that would not require any tree disturbance. If approved, the planting plan would be required for the disturbed area and approved by the city arborist. The stormwater, the city engineer, Ken Kagi, said that the structure can be built in floodplain. However, it would have to meet building standards for flood proofing, and they could have to compensate for any cut and fill, which is like mitigation. Okay, so the letter from the applicant. So her letter of appeal reads as follows. As a result of the heavy snowpack from the December 2017 storm, our farm was damaged by downed trees and split shrubbery with the subsequent crushing of a small prefabricated aluminum carport structure located next to our tool shed in which we stored farm implements and equipment. As a result of this incident, we built a functional replacement accessory structure in the same footprint. A description, scope of work for said structure is included. Because it is a structure with a dirt floor and no electricity or plumbing, we were unaware that there was a requirement for a building permit until we received a noncompliance from Milton Planning and Zoning. Our property, Front Row Farm, is a working horse farm. To that end, we have tractors of all kinds and attachments to tend to the pastures and to the arena. Since our property is long and narrow and much of it's level to Cooper Sandy Creek, there is only one place to put the shed, which also happens to be convenient to the barn. No doubt, we have built a structure that, once finished with siding and trim and is painted, will exceed the visual expectations of a typical tractor shed. As for the structure, we didn't cut any corners, thus no cost. In keeping with the rest of our property, the structure will be mostly obscured by landscaping. We are very experienced with planting and use a variety of shrubs and trees for height and width, and periodically replace those that get too tall or wide. In keeping with the aims of the City of Milton Development Preservation Goals, we are both sensitive to and in agreement with complying with code. However, our review of what is entailed with putting up something as necessary as simple as a storage shed after we were alerted to the issue reveals a myriad of conditions that seem to be geared primarily towards directing residential and commercial development and leave unclear, unworkable gaps to address the needs of working agricultural enterprises. It is our hope that the regulations are refined to accommodate the needs and enterprises. Those purposes align with the City of Milton equestrian enterprises, and also take into consideration the topographical constraints of the given site. In order to be in compliance, we are seeking a building permit retroactively, as well as for the following two variances, which I read those requests. Please be advised the new structure is situated next to another outbuilding, which was built before the Milton became a city, and both are inside the setback requirement. Additionally, the structure is in front of the barn where it belongs, and the house is on the other side of the property. The shed is blocked from view of the house by the barn. Okay, staff's response. The ordinance requires that accessory structures are located in the rear or side yards of the property, but not located within a minimum yard. This requirement helps protect the scenic view and promotes the city's visual and aesthetic character. Unlike the barn, this structure has no architectural qualities that promotes this goal. Since most of the city is zoned AG1, the requirement also promotes safety and consistency throughout the various uses, including agricultural, residential, and commercial. As noted earlier, there are extensive areas of stream buffer and floodplain on this lot. However, there are areas on this 8-acre working farm where the structure could be located. The structure could be located in the pasture to the west of the riding ring, as shown on page 17. Options A or B, there were several options that we put together, would require approval of only the front yard variance, and option C would eliminate the need for both variances. Either would be a convenient location for the tractors that are used to maintain in pasture. Allowing the utilitarian accessory structure this close to a road would not support the goals of maintaining the city's visual and aesthetic character and would be a detriment to the public good and surrounding properties. Relocating the accessory structure would secure public safety, health, and welfare while still providing substantial justice to the owners, since they would still be able to protect their tractors and other equipment. Should the board choose partial approval of this variance, instead of just relocating the structure within the front yard, but out of the minimum front yard setback. So that would be out of the 60-foot front yard is what she's referring to. Staff suggests placement in the general area of options A or B as indicated on page 17. Should the board choose to just approve the application as requested, staff recommends the following conditions. Neither of the existing accessory structures in the minimum front setback shall be expanded, which means they can't be added to. Mix of hardwoods and evergreens shall be planted to screen the structure from the road. Planting plan to be approved by the city arborist. So recommends denial of this request. So I do want to tell the board a couple of other items. Number one, we did receive 4 letters in support of the application. So I don't know if we have to read them into the record or you could just let the board see those 4 letters.
You can note for the record, those have been distributed to the board electronically from Julie Shannon, Larry Covington, Smith, Barbara, and Kenneth Slate.
That's correct. And I believe the board has them already.
Yes.
Okay. Also, I do want to point out some things that are not in the staff report, but I want to just let the board know for consideration. The code does not really differentiate between AG1 residential only use and AG1 equestrian farm use. That's a very important factor to consider here that we can't technically put into a staff report because it's not in the code, but if you look at the intent of the code, I think it needs to be considered. They did have an existing structure located there, and it was damaged in the storm, and the applicant felt that they were just replacing the existing structure. So be it that it's a little bit larger, but it's about a 500-plus square foot structure. The other one was one of those little metal car sheds that you see around town. It's little. So this is a much more permanent type structure. I want to bring to the board's attention that when I looked at it, there is a substantial amount of floodplain. So it's not just the creek and the buffers, but that a lot of the property is truly under floodplain. And just a little bit about farm uses. I call it the association of uses, the positioning or interrelationship of uses. So it's kind of a funny thing. I mean, technically, we could put a building somewhere and it fits code. But when you really have a working farm and you have a tool shed, next to the tool shed should be the tractor shed. So it's kind of something that's not written in the code, but if you've run a farm, and I'm sure the applicant will have a chance to speak about this, but I do want to bring points attention that from my point of view, certain uses have to be next to other uses, adjacent to other uses. You can't have one functional tool shed and then walk 15 miles to another building. It has to sort of be interconnected. So that's very important as positioning and interrelationships between structures, because I think that's the reason why they're all lumped and placed where they are. It's an open structure. So the code doesn't differentiate between, it just says accessory structure. Now, an accessory structure in a normal residential use would be something that would be more towards storing an automobile. It's an enclosed, it has a door, it's sort of used for general storage. Farm structures are a little different. So I do want to tell the board that this is an open structure. There are no doors. There's no side walls like within 18 inches or so of the bottom. It's got a dirt floor. So it's really a structure that is designed for agricultural uses. That's what I want to bring to the board's attention. So if you're considering further conditions, it would be like, okay, it could be used for agricultural purposes only and not used for, enclosed, don't enclose it and use it for automobile or some other use. So if you wanted to just limit a condition that says if it is the way it is and if it continues its use as agricultural, I mean, I think it would be a different building than if they enclosed it and put a door and said, now we're going to store automobiles. And then Angela said it cannot be expanded. So that would be the other condition that you have. Okay.
Are there any questions for staff regarding the report or any additional comments that he's offered? Yes, Don?
You anticipated my question a little bit, but just
Oh, okay.
so you answered it, I think, but I just want to make sure I understand. So the ordinance does not separate residential versus farm use when it's talking about these different requirements.
Yeah, the way the code is written, it defines like you're allowed to have a barn in the front yard, but a barn has to have livestock in it. Has to
Excuse
be
me, what?
livestock or some animals, in the barn. So it has to, they don't want people to build a 3-car parking garage, structure, call it a barn. I mean, how do you define a barn? So barns are allowed to be in their front yards. These are buildings that would store a tractor. So that's really not an automobile. So the code does not differentiate the storage of a farm tractor versus an automobile. In this case, the building is open. It has no overhead garage door. It's open on the bottom. It has no slab. It's truly an agricultural use. And it does not differentiate that. The code does not differentiate that.
I'm interpreting that to mean that this leaves leeway in the interpretation of this ordinance?
I believe it does.
Okay, thank you.
Any additional questions for our city architect or our city?
I do.
Yes.
So they already have structures in their front yard. And right, there are already other structures in their front yard
Yes.
that are there.
Yep. That's correct. So
But this one structure, the city had a problem with because it was redone without a variance and it was made larger.
That's correct. It was when the old structure was damaged, and once if it's damaged more than 60%, the code doesn't have any leeway in that. It says if you damage 60% or more, when you go to rebuild, you have to conform to the new zoning.
And that's including that 15 feet setback. That was also another reason that they needed to get a permit or a variance.
That's correct. So if it was out of this, there's two parts. So if it's out of the first 60 feet setback, that would be one. And then if it's in front of the main structure, that's number two. So that's why they need it both that way. But if you look at the placement on the site plan, I do want to bring out to your attention that it is adjacent to the existing tool shed that's there now. You really wouldn't want to see a building that's housing agricultural equipment like adjacent to where the animals would be, the horses, for instance. You want to try to keep these things separated as best you can, and you want to keep them as close to those two associated uses. So if you ended up putting it somewhere else on the site, it would really be a hardship, I think, for the owner to try to. They're just interrelated. I mean, you walk from one building to the other. They're kind of tied together. And the existing tool shed was something that was there back from the Fulton County years.
But to be clear, the triggering event for why we're here for this variance is the rebuilding of a damaged structure without a permit and without a variance.
Yes.
Okay.
That's correct.
I do have another question. I think your comment, I think that's on here, and then staff comments in general talk about the view, the architectural nicety, however it's put. I'm not even sure this is a factor, but if that structure stayed, what would have to happen to make it be appealing? I mean, just in your opinion.
Well, they did put a metal standing seam roof on the building, right? Correct. And metal standing seam roof is, if you look at the barns around Milton, the historical nature of the barns that are on the front yards, that the ones that you drive down, you see a lot of these older barns. They have lap siding and standing seam metal roofs. They haven't put the lap siding on it yet, but the metal standing seam roof is, and my understanding is that they will put lap siding on the barn. So it doesn't have any really architectural significance in the sense that it's an iconic structure, and it's a farm structure, but it is historically, I feel, correct to Milton standards as far as historical structures that are close to or adjacent to a road.
Thank you.
I've got a couple more questions for staff. Okay, so it also says that relocating the accessory structure would secure public safety, health, and welfare. How would removing that or relocating it secure public safety, health, and welfare?
Okay, well, to the strict interpretation of the code, I mean, if we move the structure being in compliance with what the code is looking for, and that would, yes, that, when Angela wrote the report, she felt that that would be something that would be a benefit to, full compliance to the code. I mean, when you're looking for these variances, we always say, well, is it possible that the applicant can just conform to the code? Can they place the building in an area that does work? That is a question that we always ask when we write the staff report. And from a technical standpoint, yes, we could pick up that building and place it somewhere else on the site, and it would technically meet code. Is it placed in the right spot then at that point? That's why I'm bringing that up, because there's a technical part that's just straight code, and then there's a part of, if you have a working farm and you really want it to be in the right spot, I could see why the applicant is coming in seeking a variance.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I was just wondering how that structure being located there would be, I mean, I'm not saying a problem, but be a public safety concern.
I don't really think. I mean, we try not to put buildings right up against roadways. We try not to put mailboxes, permanent mailboxes along roadways. I mean, there is, I could see the strict interpretation of the code would be if people started putting all their private garages and storage sheds and things right up against the roadway, that it would become a public nuisance or impact the public health, wealth, and safety, because we really don't want that. It is a working farm is all I'm saying. So it's a little, that's my interpretation of it.
Okay. I have one more question. So it also suggests that should we choose a partial approval, that the staff suggests relocating the structure within the front yard. Right. I know there are 3 locations, A, B, and C, sort of towards the back side. Where do they suggest in the front yard with the minimum front yard setback?
All right, so what Angela was referring to there was that it would be out of the 60-foot front yard setback requirement. So the structure, instead of being 15 feet to the road, it would meet the 60.
It would still be technically in the front yard, so that's why it's partial.
Front yard, right, that's why it would be a partial.
Yeah.
So they would have to pick up the whole building and move it.
Well, my question is there room? I mean, it looks, I've driven by the property. Is there, I didn't see.
Yeah, I mean, she laid out some options, but from the architectural perspective, I don't think any of them really would place the building in a location that would be adjacent to where the tool shed is, and it would technically work, but I don't, from a real working farm perspective, honestly, my feeling is I'd like to hear from the applicant, but I think it would be a real hardship because they're not adjacent to one another. You sort of have to keep them close when you have a working farm.
Any other questions before I ask the applicant to come forward? Go ahead.
Do we know to what extent the structure was actually damaged?
The existing structure, the applicant can weigh in more. It's my understanding that the trees fell on the existing structure and it was just totally damaged.
Okay.
Yeah, it was just, there's no residual value when that happens. It's not worth trying to save one of those buildings. It's
Scrap metal.
Just crush it, take it down and start over is the answer.
Okay, any other questions? All right, with that, I'll ask the applicant to please come forward and share any additional information with us. I will also note for the record, the board is in receipt of the email that Ms. Cookerly submitted yesterday, dated June 18th. That's been circulated electronically to this entire board.
Has everybody read it? Are we all on the same page?
Okay.
Okay, so just if you would, state your name and address for the record. Thank you.
Hey, I'm Robert Beal. I live at 13600 Providence Road in Alpharetta.
Grab that mic.
Excuse me.
Thank you so much.
Can you hear me?
Yes. There you go.
Okay. Robert Beal. I live at 13600 Providence Road in Alpharetta, and I'm the co-owner of the property with my wife, Carol Cookerly, who's here. I prepared something. I'll just kind of read it if it's okay.
That's fine.
Yes.
I appreciate the comments from Mr. Buscemi. Is that correct?
That's correct.
I would respectfully disagree with some of the comments that were in the staff report. A couple of points I'd like to make. The alternative sites that were recommended by staff would put the structure in the floodplain in all cases. And you have runoff from Providence Road and from the other in drainage in those areas, and they stay wet and soggy. And running a horse farm, you're concerned with maintaining adequate pasturage for the horses. And with the rainfall and weather patterns we have here, that's a challenge, particularly in the floodplain. So by putting that in those alternative locations, you've got equipment in there. When it's like a sponge and it's messy and sloppy, trying to drive heavy equipment, tractors, so forth over it, just plows it up and makes a huge mess. And then you're defeating the purpose of trying to maintain adequate pastures for the horses for both food and exercise. So there really is no option in terms of where it could be located. Furthermore, it's more or less a garage-type facility. It has no electricity, it has no water, and has a dirt floor. So if we located it in one of those spots, quite a distance away from the barn with no access to electricity, then you're going to be running dry boards and so forth across the property, which could create a hazard, and it's just not ideal. So having the proximity to the tool shed is critical in this case. And I would say that almost the whole acreage is in the floodplain. There are two building sites which are occupied by the house and the barn. So there's really no other place to locate it. I would say that we've always tried to maintain an attractive equestrian property, which we think is consistent with the City of Milton's stated goals in the preservation plan. So we're not asking for wholesale changes across the board, but I think on a case-by-case basis, an exception can be made, and we're asking for an exception in terms of the variance we've requested and the retroactive building permit. We mentioned that the building will be by trees and shrubbery. We've planted those in the early spring, and as they mature, most of the building will be completely blocked from view. We do have a plan to complete the building. I'd say it's probably 90% completed at this point, but we do not have siding. We do intend to put that on, and we'll also paint it in a color scheme that's consistent with the home and the barn and the other tool shed on the building, so it all conforms and is appealing in terms of visually appealing. And to maintain a horse property, it takes land and capital and equipment. So we tried to build a facility that would hold the tractors and the various implements needed for maintaining the property, and we think that's better than having equipment equipment out, it's kind of visually cluttering to see equipment strewn all over the lot, which we could probably do. But it also, you're not able to maintain the equipment in proper working order unless you can protect it, and the equipment is costly. So I'll be happy to entertain any questions you may have, but and I think Carol covered most everything that I've talked about and that Mr. Buscemi talked about in the letter she wrote on the 18th, which you have a copy of.
Are there any questions for the applicant?
How long have you owned the property for?
I think Carol bought it in 2006. It predated me. I'm sorry, 1996. 1996. That predated me. Are there any other questions you might?
The other question I have for you is, you received a courtesy notice to cease any further construction on the structure, and then code compliance came out again. What was the reason for starting construction again after the city notified you not to begin construction?
Well, we had building materials stacked up all over the yard, and we needed to get it under roof and housed. So all we did was put the roof on it to, protect the equipment.
Well, can I?
Yes.
Do you see in my note?
You have to stand up.
Yeah.
I didn't fill out a form. Is it
No, it's okay. Just stand up and state
Okay,
your
well,
name
let me
and
just,
address.
because Robert was in Florida quite a bit with his mom during the winter, and I was going back and forth to DC, but I was more involved in the winter, and then I turned it over to him when I was in DC, like all the time. So both with aging parents, or very old parents. Anyway, so we got that note, and then there was back and forth of contacting them, and then we got this very long list of things that you had to do, and I was trying to make sense of it, and it just seemed excessive for what we were trying to do because it applied. I didn't know Bob at that time, but it was just confusing, and so that's when, I think you saw my note, we did call, and a couple times we had a near miss, but we've talked to everybody in the department, and that's when the gentleman came out. It was very nice of him to come out, even though he's not, apparently finding out later, he's not directly related because he's in building. But he came out and he talked about the various things, and while we didn't ask and he didn't approve, I just said, I got to get all this stuff up because where the building was, we just had the top framed, and I don't know all the terms because I don't build, but we had the trusses up, right? And then we had all this tin that was there, and the guy was supposed to be coming, but then we have a little pasture to the right of that, which is sort of the medic pasture or the night pasture, and all that stuff was right there in the way because there's only about 20 yards in between the barn and the structure, and that's where they go in and out. So
They being the horses.
The horses. So anyway, it was back and forth. I thought that we had a placeholder with the staff because we had been in touch and we said, look, we're getting all this together. I thought it was like understood. It was my presumption that this was kind of okay because of the need, and it was like, where else would we possibly put this? We just bought tens of thousands of dollars worth of equipment. But those were conversations, I think, with people that didn't have any authority, looking back on it. And then time just sort of elongated. But Robert was on top of it starting in March, maybe? When were you pulling things together? April?
Like that.
I don't know. December to the 1st of April is pretty much a blur. Just a lot of travel. So, any other questions about that?
I do have one other question. Just thought, I guess I'm kind of a city boy, and I don't know what the official definition is of a working farm, but is this a business?
No.
Okay, so you're not operating a business there. This is,
we are, while a lot of our friends in Milton have commercial horse operations, this is purely, these horses are privately owned. We don't give lessons or anything like that.
Okay. I guess my question to myself was, and now to you, is kind of, I guess it doesn't qualify, a working farm doesn't have to equal a business.
No, not at all.
Yeah. Okay, thank you.
No, it's just wherever you have livestock. The other thing is, in my note, it is such a misnomer to think of this as the front yard. I mean, this structure is what, an acre away? On one side, we have 25 acres of undeveloped land that abuts our property. The other side, Sam Smith's property. Across the street would be the properties owned by the Slates. And it's a considerable ways away. I don't think anybody saw our tool shed until, was it the first or the second? I think you're right. Was it the first or the second snowstorm? I can't remember. Whatever. Anyway, nobody ever saw those things because we've maintained more view shed. Is that what you call it when it's just all treed and everything? Probably for a very long property, maybe arguably more than anybody, because the whole thing is lined with trees.
Okay. Any other questions for the applicant?
I do. What was the size of the original shed?
Just the little cart
It's just
thing?
like a little
Yeah.
aluminum car shed.
It wouldn't even have fit the full-size tractor that we now have.
Okay, because you had put in your appeal that it was located in the same footprint
Yes.
as the other one, but it's larger, so
It's
it
larger.
exceeds that footprint. Had you stayed within that footprint, would this structure be more conforming?
The structure wouldn't fit.
I don't understand.
It would be smaller, so I'm just
Yeah,
saying,
yeah.
would it be out of that, you have that 60-foot setback?
Oh, no,
Is
it was
that-
all.
It was
in the same
always
area. It was
in the same
wedged
spot.
in between Bradford pears.
Okay.
And what I didn't know when we planted is that Bradford pears fall apart at age 20, 25, whatever. So, yeah, that was, it's a long story, but when you go to get hay, you kind of have to get what you get. So we needed that structure, and then we were parking the one tractor underneath the overhang of the barn. But then we needed better place, the story goes on, but we needed better place for the hay, so we moved that to the overhang of the barn because it was drier. And then the new tractor with the implements would not fit into there. We got a water tank, the farm groomer also at the same time. Just normal stuff if you're going to try to maintain an arena too.
Right. And I understand what you're saying about it's a working farm and you
Right.
need to have the barn near the tool shed or, I get all that. But I just want to get back to where it said, if we were to do something partial, that there would be the opportunity to relocate within that front yard. To me, that doesn't look like on the plat where they put ABC. So is there anywhere, maybe a little bit further
No,
down
it'd
the
be
road?
closer to the house. If you wanted it moved, it would have to come closer to literally our front yard. Right now, it is at the only spot that is not in the floodplain, furthest away from the house, right next to the tool shed. The only reason it's not built adjacent to the tool shed is because we had to have room for water to come through.
Right.
And the tool shed is sort of at an angle to Providence Road, and this one is perpendicular to Providence Road, but we wanted to allow for any water to come through.
And we're trying to preserve pasturage.
Yeah. So if it came closer to the house, we'd be chewing up that medic paddock that we need. So it either has to come literally towards our front yard, or it's just, candidly, it's in the perfect spot. Nobody's ever going to see it. It's just perfect and sort of red with dock, the options, because so much water pushes through there. You wouldn't have any tired vehicles in any of those options.
Well, that's what I was concerned about, is if you built this shed in the floodplain, would your tractor be protected? Are you going
Not at
to
all.
deal
We'd
with
have a
rust?
muddy
And
floor the whole time.
Okay.
You just wouldn't park in there. So, and can I just say, we never meant to elevate this to be a problem. It was never even crossed our minds.
If you had to do it over again, what would you do differently?
If we had to do what over again? Buy that property?
No?
Oh.
The construction
Well,
of the
now we
replacement
know.
building.
Well, now we know. We'd invite you to come out, Bob, to walk the property, or whoever needs to walk it first. But I think that we would come back to the same conclusion. You know, it would take longer, and we'd probably have to just use a lot of tarps for a few months through the winter, but.
In hindsight, though, following the process may not
Oh,
have
yeah,
taken longer,
yeah.
right?
Well, you know, okay, so let's just wait, well, let's just net this out. You know that we built a house 6 years ago. I mean, we went through every possible, I mean, we did the water study for 10 grand because of the lake behind us. We did the rock thing, we did the this, we did it. We followed process all the way through, and we had no issues. So we're not renegade people. It's just have a need, see a need, do a need. And because it wasn't, we don't really, you know, it's not ultimately a permanent structure that people are placing value on, it didn't elevate to an issue for us. But it's an issue. And not happy to be the center of attention on this, trust me.
Yes.
Not at all.
Any additional questions before I open it up for public comment? You can have a seat. I'm going to open up for public comment. You'll have a chance to make any closing remarks at the end. Okay. With that, I'll open the floor for public comment. If you're here to speak in opposition or in favor, I'll do it in two separate groups, each with a 10-minute limit in total. As I said, we are in receipt of letters from neighbors. You're welcome, though, to speak if you here still want to add more comment. If you're here to speak in opposition, the microphone is open. There's no one here in opposition. Is there anyone here that cares to speak in favor? Yes, sir. Please, have you filled out a comment card? Please just tell us your name and address.
My name is Sam Smith. I live at 13550 Providence Road, which is next door to Ms. Cookerly. Our properties are separated by the Cooper Sandy Creek. I've seen the small shed that Ms. Cookerly is building on her side yard near the barn. I know that much of her property is located in a floodplain, and the proposed site for the shed is the best location for it, in my opinion. I also know that the shed, though very small, is very well built and will be finished in the same attractive standards as the other buildings on the property. And the shed will be nearly invisible from the road once the landscaping is finished. I have no objection to this variance, and I urge you to approve it. I do have a question for the board, though. How many of you have actually seen this property? I hope you've shared with the others your observations of the property, because for me, this is not a big decision. I think approval is warranted. And I also think if you've seen the property, later on, if somebody comes to you and says, hey, we're thinking about doing a brochure about the beauty of the city of Milton, can you recommend a small working horse farm that we can go photograph and put in the brochure? I hope this property would come back to your mind and you'd recommend it. Thank you.
Thank you. Is there anyone else here to speak in favor? I'll remind you of the 10-minute limit total. Go ahead, just please announce. Have you filled out a yellow card?
I did.
Just your name and address, and
Yeah, I'm not going to take 10 minutes.
that's fine.
My name is Ken Slate, along with my wife Barbara. We live at 13545 Providence Road. We also own the adjacent property. We don't live there, but we own it, 13565 Providence Road. Both of these properties are across Providence Road, directly facing Robert and Carol's property. We've been there since 2010, so they've been our neighbors since we've been there. And during that time, they built their house there. Robert and Carol are some of the nicest people you'd ever want to meet. And regarding aesthetics, it's a beautiful horse farm. Every improvement and structure that they have is first rate. You mentioned, or someone mentioned about landscaping. We didn't even see the shed until the snow and, crushed the trees and the existing shed. So they do have landscaping all across the street, so you really don't see a lot of the property. You can see a little bit of the field, a little bit of the horse rank, but not a ton of the property. But what you can see is very beautiful. And we know because we drive to our home every day, so we probably see it more than about anybody. Like I say, it's a beautiful farm. We don't have any problem with it, and we would like to encourage you to approve their appeal.
Okay.
Thanks.
Is there anyone else here to speak in favor? We've got a couple more minutes. Hearing no interest, seeing no interest, I'll note that the public comment is closed. Before I open the floor for a motion, are there any final questions of staff?
I have another question, not of staff though, but of the applicants. If this were to be approved, would you agree to keep it an open shed?
Yes.
And not enclose it?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Okay, with that, I'll open the floor for a motion and a second. I've made quite a few notes. I'll start with a motion and see how this goes. I'll make a motion to approve the two-part variance for V18-006 with the following conditions. Number one, the existing non-conforming accessory structures shall not be expanded. Number two, plantings to screen the accessory structures from Providence Road. Planting plan to be approved by the city arborist. Number three, limit use as planned to the existing equipment shed, no housing of livestock. Number four, complete siding, installation, and paint as noted in scope of work as approved by the city architect.
I second.
Did you include to keep it as an open structure?
I limited the use as planned and as an existing, as it exists for equipment shed, to clarify that. Any other discussion on that motion or the conditions?
I would just say I think that this motion's correct because I think we meet all four of the stipulations for variance. I think when your variance is including both variances, is that correct?
Correct.
Okay. I'll just repeat why I think that. Number one, I think it meets the intent of the ordinance only because I'm not sure the ordinance, it's a precise ordinance, but I think it leaves some room for interpretation as relative to a farm. So I think we meet that condition. The hardship, at first I didn't realize this, but in the explanation of the pasture concerns and the proximity to the tool shed, I think that would be hardship to move it. As far as meeting the, is it any detriment to the community or surroundings? Apparently not, because there's 4 letters of support from neighbors. And as far as public safety, health, and welfare, I don't see any issues there at all. And so I think personally it meets all the issues, all the requirements for approval.
Okay. With that, and no additional discussion, I'll actually open the floor for a vote. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed?
Aye.
Motion passed 5-1.
So can I just, Don, you seconded the motion?
No,
I did.
Kim Keller did.
Oh, Kim, okay, I'm sorry.
It's okay.
So with that, you're free to move forward with the project. I would ask that you contact staff for next steps in terms of your building permit and whatnot. Thank you for your presentation today and also your volunteerism with the city.
Our pleasure. Thank you very much. Thank you.
With that, I'll move to the next item on our agenda, which is consideration of appeals and secondary variances. Bob, do we have any appeals or secondary variances to discuss tonight?
No, we don't. We do.
Item number 7 is old business. Any old business? Number 8 is new business. Any new business? That leaves us with number 9. I make a motion to adjourn.
Second.
I have multiple seconds on that. We'll go with the vice chair, Ken Sisson, seconding. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? We are adjourned.